Welcome to Breaking Ground, a podcast about development and NYC. I'm Jordan Hoch. This is Wes Stanton, and this is Lou Madigan of Madigan Developments, developer extraordinaire. All right, let's get into it. What's going on in the market, Wes?
I mean, it definitely feels a little slower, I think. I think you probably agree with that. But I'm not sure if that's relative to last year or relative to, the market's tanking or something like that. If you listen to the papers, they're only focusing on this year versus last year.
Right, 30% down, 25% down.
But prices really haven't gone down significantly.
Right.
And if you look at the transactional volume between this year and the 5 years preceding COVID, it's all very similar.
So 16, 17, 18, 19.
We're better than 17, 18. We're probably at 2016. Maybe 2015 was more.
You're talking about transactional levels?
Transactionally.
Yeah.
So, I think that I might feel it's a little slow because I'm used to last year and I'm not remembering 3 years ago.
Right.
Right?
I think the national trend, in theory, if interest rates double, if a mortgage doubles,
prices should go down.
Prices are either going to go down or transactions are going to go down.
Sure.
And the stereotype, or at least the rule of thumb, is that in the rest of the country, transactions still keep happening because people move, they have jobs, people pass away. And there are motivated sellers. There are typically fewer motivated sellers in New York, and so when interest rates go up, and what we typically see is volume go down.
So Miller Samuel just put out a report. They're a big appraiser. They compile a lot of the data for Manhattan and Brooklyn in terms of the real estate market, right? Do you know that?
Yeah.
You're smiling at me. So. Anyway, so they actually said that even though transactions are down, also inventory is down. So demand is down, but inventory is down, which is kind of evening itself out.
And it's keeping prices buoyed.
Exactly, and so you're still getting maybe not as many price wars, bidding wars, but they still happen. There's still great things. Like I'm selling an apartment that just went to contract, by far the highest price per square foot, by about 15% in Williamsburg, and we had 3 offers.
You'd have to think with a dollar at a premium against the euro and the pound, and no Russian buyers at this point. It might be fewer foreign buyers in the city. No,
there are few foreign buyers at lower levels. But the wealthy will always purchase whatever they want to purchase. They're not purchasing because interest rates or markets. They're purchasing because they see a shiny object and they must have it.
But to your point, Lou, I think most of the transactions that are happening are consumers that need to move for whatever reason. Right. Unfortunately, mom passed away. They need to sell the home. I just had another child. I need to upgrade. I need a bigger place. I just got a big promotion. I think people are moving for a reason. I think if you were, maybe playing around with the idea of moving from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom, and I had a 2.5% interest rate, and suddenly I got to take a 6. Right. Maybe that's a move that doesn't
And if you're
happen.
selling at a record price in Williamsburg, it must be for the working rich, not the truly rich.
Well,
because the only people buying today are rich people because of the fucking housing crisis in the city.
Yes, well.
Yeah, there's very little inventory, so it's keeping prices up and transactions. So historically speaking,
the cost of ownership right now is very high.
Well, no, very high compared to the last 10 years, but not necessarily high historically. 6%. There was 8%. There was 6% interest rates in 2008. There were 17% interest rates in 1980.
Right, but that was a long time ago. The current, the implementation of all the technology that you guys deal with all the time, that even we deal with building buildings, is a deflationary factor. It's caused deflation all over the planet. Up until this point, anytime anyone wanted anything, somewhere on the planet showed up and said, okay, I'll make it for you. And it all was on Amazon or Alibaba or some other digital market. So there's constant supply for constant demand. And if you couldn't get it out of China, then you can produce it in Sri Lanka. But when you have a global supply chain crisis, suddenly, not everyone can have everything all at once. And so we've had record inflation, and now we have record interest rates and stuff happening all over the world. No, thankfully.
Furniture's cheap.
For cheap.
Now
it takes 6 months. It takes a year.
Exactly right.
When you bought it 8 months ago. Now they've stocked up, and there's tons of stuff in the warehouse. There's tons of sales.
So you're saying there's hope.
I'm saying there might be some hope. Yeah.
All right. So with that in mind, That's what's going on in the market. And so let's talk about what's happening in the news, baby. Last week, the New York Times put out an article called Taller Towers, Fewer Homes. New boutique condo towers, some with fewer apartments than the buildings they replace, are squandering high-density sites in Manhattan, urban planners say. So it's an article directed at the idea that the Upper West and Upper East Side, there's a bunch of new buildings that are being built that are being geared towards luxury buyers, and they are reducing the density in the buildings, or could be built, and replacing them with these luxury towers.
So essentially, you could build 60 units by the zoning, but the developers are choosing to build 20.
And
Because
to
they're
me,
building larger units for condo buyers who happen to be wealthier buyers.
absolutely. And one of the things that was really infuriating about this article to me was the idea that they're showing these numbers that you could build as of right 66 units, and these developers are building 40 units, but they're not really talking about the idea that you really can't build 66 units in these.
Well, you
these
can
places.
if you're building closets.
Right, and if you don't want to make any money. So
That's right.
this is housing advocates and elected officials deciding that the problem with the real estate market in New York is there isn't quite enough regulation. The government really should also now be telling you what the unit mix should be. Should we have 1 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms? Should they be duplexes or triplexes? Or should we should just do studios for everybody? And that's the problem.
Well, these are also the people that are yelling about a housing crisis, which there definitely is. But they're also the people that are 100% responsible for creating the crisis and making it worse.
And by putting out articles like this, where you're flouting numbers that maybe to someone untrained, like they look like, oh yeah, they could have built 66 units, they only built 40, but they're not saying that like to build 66 units is completely financially unviable, and you couldn't build 66 units because no one wants to live in a shoebox.
Right, and if the government wants to build housing, and if it wants to build 66 units on that plot of land,
right,
it should buy the plot of land and develop the housing, and then they can be hated. They can be as hated as much as Robert Moses is.
There could be a crane sitting there for 7 years.
Right, exactly right. And like you had the project in Harlem where the guy wanted to redevelop a gas station into 900 units, 50% of which would be affordable, but the local city council person was against it because it wasn't affordable enough. Where only 50% was affordable.
They should make a law that says grandstanding is illegal.
It's just nuts. We have this.
What's crazy about that particular?
There's no logical way of getting to there when you realize that no one's going to put $2 into something to get $1 back.
But what's even
crazier?
Just doesn't
work like
what's
that.
even crazier about that particular site is now he's going to build a truck stop there.
Yes,
they're going to build a truck
storage.
Stop. So he could have had 900 units, and now we'll have truck storage. That's really better for the community.
You know what's also better? It's much better for traffic.
Right.
You know what they could do? Build an Amazon fulfillment center. We're closing one currently in Hoboken, which people are thankful for, but we literally get 5,000 deliveries a day come out of this facility in Hoboken. Build it in Manhattan. We need another 5,000 cars a day.
There's a problem. Amazon already tried to do that in Long Island City.
And that same
and see what
person
happened.
shut them down. Yes,
correct,
right.
Yeah.
Right. What we're talking about here is a major housing crisis, but no one has the balls to really tell the truth to everybody and give developers what they need, which is to make these projects financially viable. It's called highest and best use, right?
Or at least you need to address supply. If you don't address supply, and I'm not talking about taking the same square footage and carving it up differently, but I mean adding to the square footage. If there was a milk shortage, if there was a milk crisis, people would say, produce more milk.
Right.
We have a housing crisis, and it seems like the response from progressives, and I'm progressive, is price controls. The problem we don't have is we don't have enough government regulation, we don't have enough price controls on housing, and that will solve the problem.
That's not progressive. That's
insane.
That's
it's what happened. It's what happened in San Francisco, and you can have really a record homeless problem in the city because no one will be able to afford the housing unless we bring back some kind of tax abatement. We will have no rental units.
I find it incredibly rich
tax
that
abatement.
those people screaming about rental development and housing shortages are the same people that do 421A. Just get it back.
So
In
let's-
whatever form, reasonable form it's going to come, do 421A, you will get more rental development.
So let's talk.
the only way to get it.
Let's talk about this for a second. So there are basically there's a bunch of different proposals on the table for how to deal with this housing crisis. One of those that has historically been used is 421A, which is a tax abatement that basically says that if you build a certain amount of affordable housing, then we will give you a subsidy and you could build a little bit taller. And that balance has given developers the motivation to put that affordable housing in, and it's been the only way that the deals pencil out so that you can build rental housing in New York.
And it's been the
more
only
importantly, that you
affordable
can
housing.
build affordable housing
That's right. It's
in
the
New York.
only affordable housing that has been built in New York City in the last 35 years has been because of 421A
which expired earlier this year.
in June.
So, and the reason it expired is because progressives believe that it wasn't affordable enough, the housing, so that
Well,
we need.
for example, the woman in Harlem, 50% wasn't good enough. She wanted 100,
Right. She wanted 100%.
which is insane.
Well, it's not insane. It's just not. It's not profitable.
It's asking a for-profit business to not make any profit. In fact,
Correct.
lose a
To
ton
lose
of money.
The affordable housing, remember, if you build an affordable housing in a multifamily building, meaning it's 25 stories, and especially if it's going to be a doorman building, the cost to operate that building of heating and lighting the corridors, of providing heat to the apartments, to having the doormen at the door, to maintain the elevators and the water pumps and everything else in the building is roughly $50 or $60 a square foot. And you're only collecting $20 a foot in rent. So literally on every affordable unit you build as a rental unit, you lose money on every unit. And for most of those units, which are inclusionary housing, there's 2 affordable programs. Most of the stuff that's built in the city is inclusionary housing. It's affordable forever. So when you sign up as a developer to build inclusionary housing, you're signing up to have a loss of 25 to 30% of all the units in the building forever.
But it's offset.
As willing the willingness to do that comes from allowing people to build 20% more and to get a tax abatement on your real estate taxes for the next 10, 15, 25 years, depending on the program and where you are in the city.
to make the market rate units more profitable, so they balance each other out.
Which still turns out to a low, like 11 to 12% return on investment to do that with the tax abatement. Without the tax abatement, you'd lose money. You can't do a rental building in New York City without a tax abatement. It's not financially feasible.
But so to those of you who are
Also,
listening,
the land values make it very difficult to find property that pencils out because the land is so expensive. Most of the people building rental are building it on land that they've owned this land for 40 years. It was a garage or whatever.
That's right. And the developer that wants to build rentals is willing to take a lower return for a lower risk, because rentals are a lower risk product than condos, where you're timing the market. When you build a condo, let me finish. When you're building a condo and you're timing what's the market going to be like 4 years from now when I complete. When we build a rental building like we recently did and it opens in the middle of pandemic, yes, that first year you're getting a financial hit, but eventually it comes back. And so rental units are less risky, but they're much less lower return. But when you're buying the land purchase price is being determined by the highest offer the land seller is going to get, which is going to come from a condo developer who's willing to take higher risk for a higher return, and then you only get condos and you get no affordable housing. So to build rental housing, to make the higher land value worth it, you can only do it if you have a tax abatement that says, okay, I'll take a lower return, but I'll take lower risk, and I'll build affordable housing, and that's how the city gets affordable housing.
So right now, because there's all this, because the progressives on the city council and whatnot are saying it's not affordable enough, nothing is getting built. So that's the irony of the situation. Now, there's one other major proposal right on the table, and it's talking about changing the density rules of the city. Well, Lou, do you know about that?
Sure. The state has proposed lifting the limit of 12 FAR for residential uses in the city. Right now, there are lots of properties in the city
So
that
what does
have.
that mean? What does that mean?
FAR is the ratio of the land size to how many square feet you're allowed to build. And because you have setbacks in the front and setbacks in the back, if you had a 10 FAR on a property, you're typically building about 30 stories because you lose about 50% of the land area as you go higher.
Because people, buildings wedding cake, and they have
Correct, to
as
create
per-
more light and air on the ground.
Right.
Right now, there's lots of higher density FAR for office use, for commercial use, for hotel use, but not for residential use. So if you lifted that maximum density for residential, you could then have even more residential uses, more residential density in a variety of places around the city. The city would still have to change the zoning. But right now, the city isn't even permitted to have residential density higher than 12.
So and what they're saying is they would trade, once again, it's a trade, right? They would trade some additional density to the developers in exchange for affordable housing in these buildings. Once again, we have to make the deal profitable for the developer, and in order to incentivize them to do these projects.
Because you also have to remember, the developer, even though the building a rental building is less expensive than, or less risky than building a condo building, it doesn't mean it's not risky.
That's right.
It's incredibly risky.
That's right. And your money is locked in place for 5 years. Unlike any other stock investment, mutual fund, or a bond, which any day of the week, any moment of the day, you can sell it and get maybe it not be profitable that day, but you get 90% of your money back on any given day. With a real estate development, you're putting in equity today and taking on the full development risk, meaning you're personally obligated to complete the building, and the money you've put in, you're not seeing that back for 6 to 8 years typically.
So Lou mentioned before, like a developer making like 11%, profit on a deal, and to some of you that might sound really high, but not when you're looking at it in terms of, I just put $200 million into this building and locked it up. When we were working on the building we worked on in the past, the pandemic came, and
That's right.
and this poor developer, you're mid-stride. And you can't pull out all of a sudden because now so you got to keep plowing forward in a pandemic. You're spending hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars a month.
That's right.
And then you put these units on the market and you're losing money for a year.
We talk about the pandemic as if that's like the only risk. No. That's not the risk that like is the likely risk, although things like that happen. But it comes down to if there's a construction issue. If you go into the ground and you find something in the ground that you didn't know was there, that stalls your development for 3 months, 6 months. If you get a stop work order because somebody complains about noise the next door, and now all of a sudden the city doesn't show up for 3 weeks to inspect it,
right.
That 3 weeks could cost you $10 million, yes. Depending on how the project.
For our project that we just completed recently, our operating costs, interest expense, was around $1 million a month. So a 3-month delay, which is what happened during pandemic, that's $3 million out of pocket. You're never recouping. You're getting no value for it. It's just lost time, and the time costs the money.
So the point is, yes, developers need to have a 10, 11% profit on their investments. Otherwise, this is too scary. Too many people stay up at night staring at the ceiling.
Point of case, we work with developers. I would say half of them have decided it's just not worth doing it here. Not in
New York City. It's so much easier to do it everywhere else.
Exactly.
That's right.
The demand is shaky. The environment is shaky. There's no 421A. Going through the DOB is a nightmare. You stop work orders. People are just not. They're not. There's a group of people that are screaming to developers to lose money on buildings and build more buildings.
Yes.
But I'm going to make it painful for you on every step of the way.
And you have no idea what it's going to be tomorrow. And you have a whole government infrastructure saying the problem is there's not enough cost.
And this is the best one. This is the best one.
Yes.
Once your building's done, we're going to sit on those affordable housing for
over
a year and just not doing anything with them.
Exactly.
So even though there's supposed to be people living in them month 3 or month 4, we're going to push that out about a year because obviously that $20 a square foot per unit, that's insignificant.
The first year,
doesn't mean
throw it away the first year.
So what Wes is addressing is the idea that even once a developer builds affordable housing, because the city doesn't, the gears of city move so slowly, the units sit vacant for a full year before you can put someone who needs a home into it. And
they're not supposed to.
But they do.
They're not supposed to.
But they do. So
these
poor people are not living in the homes. These poor developers are sitting vacant, and then the city's saying you should build more for less money.
Yes, correct.
It's insane. Now, Now, but we should address, as we're clearly friendly to development here, the two real estate guys and the developer, but we should say that we agree that there is a terrible housing shortage in New York, that people are desperate for homes that are affordable.
And it costs too much, right?
And it costs too much in the city, and we need to do something, and it shouldn't be done deep in the boroughs.
The pipeline of new development in Manhattan is almost non-existent at this point.
Right. So, but it shouldn't be done deep in the boroughs.
What's wrong with it being deep in the boroughs? I grew up deep in the boroughs.
So, I mean, but it should be a mix. It should be a mix.
It should be a mix. It shouldn't be happening all over the city.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with there being 25 city blocks in Brooklyn, the fourth largest city in America, where there are 50, 60-story buildings.
No, right. Of course.
There's nothing. And why not have some 10-story buildings in other areas in Queens and Brooklyn?
Look at Midtown West. It's all low-rise, 4 or 5-story buildings.
Right, exactly right.
Back to back to back to back to back. I mean, you could probably build
most of Hell's
thousands
Kitchen.
and thousands
Most of Hell's
units
Kitchen is
for
low-rise buildings.
Police officers and garbage men and teachers and
bus drivers and firemen. Yes, exactly. But that's not happening.
And those affordable units that are built are beautiful.
That's right.
They're very, very nice properties.
And at the same time, we have the city. The city itself owns thousands and thousands of square feet of land. Right. I mean, like, why aren't they developing? You want 100% affordable? Do it on your own property.
Well, because the perception would be that the city is giving handouts to developers to make more money, but the problem is that. You're right. You are giving a handout, and someone is making money, but you're also minimizing the housing crisis.
It's the only way to get anything done, though. Someone has to have a profit motive to do it, or you're not going to get it done.
It needs to be a mix of a lot of things, right? Like these community groups, like NIMBYs, not in my backyard kind of people. They need to allow more building to be built in, let's say, the West Village or some of these neighborhoods where the density is so low. Right, we need to build more in all of these neighborhoods, and then we need to also do the 421A, and we also need to do the density issues, and we need to do all of it at the same time, and we need to work together.
But it would be. I mean, it's nothing simple, but the solution to it is not as complicated. It's complicated because people make it complicated. It's not complicated because it's actually complicated. Bring back 421A in a reasonable way. Take out the roadblocks for developers to develop, and increase the density and make people make rental buildings more affordable to build and more incentivized.
Incentivized, yeah.
It's. The pundits talk about it as if the solution to this crisis is so difficult. But grandstanding, if you take that out, all of a sudden you're going to have a solution.
And let's also,
if you take out the whole, it's an election year and I don't want to be perceived as this and blah, blah, blah. If you say, I actually want to do what's right for the city and for my constituents and for the people that I'm actually trying to build this stuff for, just get out of the way.
And then also, I think let's accept some stuff as developers and the community that there are developers who do take advantage of some of the situations that they have, and we need to,
and those are the developers that shouldn't be involved in the program.
And they should be punished for those things.
But there's plenty of developers. One is sitting right next to me. Plenty of developers that would build those projects, take a reasonable profit, and deliver a good service to the city as well as to the people living in those units.
Right, and listen, we should be protecting some of these rent stabilized tenants, of course, and so you're speaking about Midtown West. The reason you can't develop a lot of those Midtown West mid-block, walk-ups is because they're spattered with rent stabilized
units. That's right.
Stabilized tenants.
But not all of them.
Lots of them.
A lot of them.
But a lot of them. And as you can see with the project on the Upper West Side that Naftali is trying to do, one person can hold out and stop a project for 3 years. It's insane. There needs to be a regulatory process where a person in a rent stabilized unit gets a reasonable settlement to help them find another rent stabilized unit and gets a subsidy to do it.
Or that rent stabilized person gets at the developer's cost, has to move into a separate unit for the time that it's being developed, and then gets a nicer unit in the building that's getting built.
We can take some of these walk-up mid-block buildings with these rent-stabilized tenants. We just move them for a couple of years, and we let the developer build a huge new building that has rent-stabilized tenants in it, and then we move the people back into the building.
Give them a priority for those units.
And look, I'm not trying to minimize the disruption to
Their
people's lives when they have to move. I get it. I understand. It's a bad situation for them, but the result of it is a much better situation.
It's much better city. In the end, we need more supply of housing.
And those fire people need to be part of our community, and they have to live on the Upper East Side.
But let me ask you, you've been developing for how many decades?
30 years now.
Okay, 30 years. Have you ever seen a combination of situation more difficult than it is now in terms of building a building?
Absolutely not. It is now.
Have you ever seen a pipeline?
It's impossible.
A pipeline, even though you see construction going on, all of those buildings were started 3 to 5 years ago.
That's right.
And
have you ever seen a pipeline as low as it is today?
No. And I'd much rather be building in Jersey. I can buy land at half the price.
Or Florida, or North Carolina.
That's right. But even to service this market.
Or Texas.
Brooklyn competes with New Jersey, right, with Jersey City. And if anyone moved to the city today, I would say go find an apartment in Jersey City. I wouldn't, and if I was a developer, I can buy land in Jersey City at half the price, collect the same rents I collect in Brooklyn.
Which honestly sucks, because the moment that somebody starts saying, hey, let's move to Jersey versus New York City, New York's got a problem.
That's right, you're hurting the city. And
New York's got a problem.
New York City
it's never been
is making itself regulatorily impossible to build anything.
Tell me, what do you think, what are the biggest hurdles? Like, what are the biggest pain points right now in the process?
In New York, the lack of a tax abatement, the high cost of construction, the requirement to do union labor after you build, right? So our staff that's operating the building is union labor. If you look under the de Blasio administration, right? So in the last 8 years, for rent stabilized units, and that's when we build affordable housing, even the market rate units are subject to rent stabilization. So when you build one of these affordable housing buildings, yes, 25 or 30% affordable, but the other 75 to 70% are often rent stabilized. And then those units can only be increased in rent based on the maximum amount allowed by the Rent Stabilized Board, which under the de Blasio administration for the last 8 years has been roughly 3%. Not 3% a year, 3% total. The total rent increase during the entire de Blasio administration from beginning to end was a total of 3% in increases permitted at a time when operating costs went up 20%. Who would do such a? Who would build?
It's an 8-year period.
Who would build into that market? You're nuts. At least under Bloomberg, and now under the new mayor, under Adams, there was a 3% rent increase permitted this year. At least there's some reasonable mechanism for catching up for the operating costs, which you're obligated to do union labor, and those union agreements change every year.
But
operating costs go up 20%, and you have rent increases that go up 3%. It's just
they're also talking about universal rent control.
Who would build a building where the mayor of New York, de Blasio, was on Morning Joe one morning, gets up and says, "I really want it to be the situation where the mayor of New York can set every rent in New York City." Who would build into that market?
De Blasio said that?
De Blasio said that.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought you were okay.
Not Adams. No. De Blasio said this. But when you think of
this is why
when
de
you have a
Blasio's
city,
had such an amazing run for Senate.
But when you have a city government where you have mayors in the last mayor and even the current city council, where one city council person thinks 50% affordable housing isn't enough, and I don't think a developer should be able to build what they have the right to build. We want to determine what the unit mix is and what the unit density is. Who wants to build in that kind of market? It's so intrusive. And the risk going forward, what's it going to be like in 5 years? Who knows? Because I typically build rental buildings and we hold them forever. Who knows what the risk is in 5 years?
So a city council member who will keep nameless, through her arms were up in the air with some of these Upper East, Upper West Side buildings that were getting converted. But I want to know, like, if you're a city council member, you've been there for 20 years, you know the story. Like, you know the profitability of the developers. I just don't understand, like, where are all these council members coming from? Like, they have to know this is a zero-sum game.
It's about not unlike the crazy Republicans who have, crazy Republican elected officials who are being driven crazy by their crazy constituents. I had a friend recently who moved back to New York from Korea. We went to college together, Brooklyn College, and now he's moved back to New York. He gets to New York and he goes, holy shit, the land is so expensive, units are so expensive. One bedrooms are all $3,500 a month, and they want my income to be 50 times my monthly expense. Landlords are insane. Landlords are destroying everybody. Greedy landlords are destroying everything. I thought, hold on, by the way, we're still friends, and let me give you, there's another side to this story. You're not allowed to take more than 1 month's security. You haven't been able to evict a tenant in 3 years. So people have literally been not paying rent for 3 years and not getting evicted. And, so the risks are high. And so most landlords do not want to take on a tenant where there's some chance where they're not going to pay their rent.
Particularly when there's no housing stock and there's less than 1% vacancy.
That's
and you have
right.
a choice of 10
exactly,
people.
Exactly correct.
Why would you choose the worst option when you can choose the best option? Not that your friend's the worst option, but...
No, he's working for the Brooklyn Public Library. And in an executive position, which is a great job, great public service.
But that's exactly the person who we need to find housing for.
Correct, exactly right. And so what did I say?
Yeah.
What did I say? Go to New Jersey. Go to Jersey City, because it's impossible to find. We are in such a housing crisis in New York City, it's impossible to find affordable housing in New York.
That is terrible. The idea that a New York City developer
is
told
telling a
someone
friend
to go to Jersey.
Go to Jersey City
Kill me.
to
When I hear
find
this,
an apartment.
It makes me cringe. All right. So that's what's going on in the news right now. Thank you for joining us to our first episode of Breaking Ground. I'm Jordan Hoch, Wes Stanton, Lou Madigan. See you next time.